Well, hi. In today's video, I'm going to make a few permutations. The first is going to be a multimedia collage piece, and then I'm going to make a little series of this continuing series of black paper pieces I call neon. I use Sakura Moonlight gel pens on black paper, and it just kind of reminds me of neon, so that's why I call it that. I had mentioned in my last video that I was going to do a review of the paper I'm using, but I think I'm going to save that for another video, and this one's just going to focus on a single paper, and I'm not really going to talk about the paper. Instead, I'm going to talk about my painting techniques. So if you eventually want to see a review of Fabriano versus Strathmore papers, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and before you forget, why don't you go ahead and give me a thumbs up. So I have some papers that are smaller, or are larger than A4, which is 21 by 29.7 centimeters. And like if I bought the paper in the United States, it's not a standard size, it's standard here in Asia. So I trim it down to fit these sleeves that I bought here, these plastic sleeves for when I ship, and just to store my pieces, I always put them in these plastic sleeves. So that's why I trimmed down my paper. Here I'm selecting color for this piece. I've been really into this combination of pink and green and gray, so that's why I selected these. I don't know where I got this from. Like I must have seen it somewhere where I was just like, that's a good combination, so I've been doing it a little bit lately. So this piece ended up being unusual because I used 4 different media on it. I used pen, watercolor, thread, and collage. I like using different, or as many media as possible. I like to show a dynamic range of expertise on a piece, but it's also difficult to do because you don't want to just be throwing things on for the sake of throwing them on. So yeah, this is up there in terms of the number of media I use. It's also a little unique because the collage elements, these 2 characters that I use, end up being, they don't interact with the permutation shape so much like they do in a lot of my previous collage pieces. So it's kind of unique in that way. The composition is a bit more abstract, and I guess necessarily so because one of the figures is just composed of Chinese characters, but it's a figure, and he's not interacting with the permutation, he's interacting through the thread medium with the other figure. I don't often include my paint mixing in my videos. It's very time consuming. It's often more time consuming than the actual application of paint, especially on an abstract piece where I am doing like quick painting. But So I'm including it here partially because it is so time consuming. It's a big part of what I do. But also I do visually love the look of a palette full of colorful paint, and I hope you do too. And it's just, I think it looks beautiful. And the more colors you use, the longer it takes. So I wanted to talk about the different painting techniques I use in these pieces. The first here is just the brush stroke, and that is a time-honored technique of having an obvious brush stroke. Conceptual painters sometimes want to tell the story of how the piece was made by being obvious about the construction. And that's when you can see the exact width of the brush. You could see the individual bristles if it's a bristle brush. And that's just one of the techniques that painters use when they're trying to be conceptual and showing how their work is made. So there's two ways of sort of layering paint. You can do wet on wet or wet on dry. And wet on wet is what it sounds like. You paint some color, and then before it dries, you paint another color or several, and as a result, the paint mixes while you're working. And that is a nice way to get a really beautiful sort of spectrum of color between the first color and the second color, where they've got their purity on either side, but where they're touching or coming together, they mix and create sort of this soft blend of color that's gradual. When you do a water wash, you take water and you apply it to the paper, and then you apply paint to the wash. And what this does is it creates sort of a concentration of paint, but it fans out as a result of mixing with the water, so you get a concentration to a flow out. It's really beautiful, and it's just another way to sort of use the paint on the paper. Another technique that really is about showcasing the paint itself is the paint drip. I like using paint drips, but I also feel that they can be overused, so I don't use them in all of my work, and it's not something I'd call a trademark thing that I do, but I like doing it once in a while. But basically what it does is it shows to the viewer that paint was once liquid and it flows, and it's just another technique to sort of show that you're using paint, I guess. Wet on dry layering is when you apply wet paint to already dry paint, and it creates a different effect. It is useful for when you don't want the colors to mix. Sometimes you get some re-wetting of the first layer, especially with watercolor. So you have to really be quick about your application of paint. The more you work it, the more likely the first layer is to become re-wetted, and then they start to mix together. But what you can do with wet on dry is you create very distinct layers where the two layers intersect. You see the under layer being affected by the first layer but not mixing together per se. It's just another way to mix paint without really actually mixing it, if that makes sense. Another technique that shows off the paint itself is paint spatter. And that's when you get like micro droplets of paint, either or bigger droplets by whipping the brush or by flicking it with your finger. This creates like a sort of chaotic spray of paint that is a little unexpected, and that's partially why I like using it. Again, a lot of my work is about the tension between deliberate mathematical lines and chaotic organic painting. And so paint spatters. So paint spatter is a good example of using a medium to exhibit chaos that I like to use. Now that both layers of painting are finished, I just have to start doing all the line work. And there's not a lot to say about it, so I'll just have you enjoy the meditative drawing. You'll notice that I switch between pieces. I never draw intersecting lines in a row on the same piece, because if I put the ruler over the fresh gel on the gel pens, it could stick to the ruler, or I could smudge it on the paper. So I had to learn that the hard way. So what I do is I draw a couple lines and then do a second piece and then a third piece and then come back to the first one and redraw. So that's why I constantly am doing multiple pieces simultaneously. It just allows me to work faster as opposed to having to make one line and then wait for it to dry. And when I work that way, what ends up happening is I make a line and I do something else, and I like completely forget what I was doing, and you know, it takes me even longer to finish a piece than just having to wait for the drying time. So I'm really curious what people think about this style of piece of permutation I've been making. Facebook recently changed their algorithm, so I'm getting fewer views and fewer likes, and it just happens to be coinciding with making a bunch of these in a row. And, one can't help but wonder if the fewer likes is related to the content I'm producing, or if it's just because of the algorithm. So let me know in the comments. I mean, I have far fewer viewers on YouTube than I have Instagram followers, so I'm sure I won't get much more than anecdotal evidence. But if anyone sees this and decides they want to comment about how they feel about this body of work, please let me know in the comments, and I appreciate it. So guys, that was by no means the exhausting of painting techniques. Those were just the ones I noticed that I was using in this little mini series. If that kind of stuff is interesting to you, please let me know in the comments. I'm not sure if you're a painter, or if you're just an art lover, or if you only like my work, or if you happened upon this because you were looking for Sakura pens. Let me know in the comments how you found me and whether you found my comments about painting techniques interesting. And like I said, give me a thumbs up, it helps. And if you haven't already subscribed, you'll get more content like this. And thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.